Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 817 for May 3rd, 2020. Coming up in a few minutes.
We're a craft distiller. We do everything by hand in terms of heads and hearts cut. So it's been fun every beer truck trying to figure out what the heads taste like and what the hearts taste like, because it doesn't taste like whiskey. It still has the characteristics of beer. So figuring that out has been fun, and our distillers have been enjoying it.
Emily Harrison is the distillery manager at WhistlePig Farm in Vermont. Her teams come to the aid of brewers from as far away as Texas who have been sitting on thousands of gallons of, well, what was once fresh beer. With bars and restaurants largely shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic, those brewers have had no market for their beer. And it's actually cheaper to fill up a tanker truck and take the skunky beer to Vermont instead of dumping it down the drain. Remember, whiskey is what beer wants to be when it grows up. So in this case, the team at WhistlePig is performing an act of mercy, so to speak. I'll talk with Emily Harrison and WhistlePig CEO Jeff Kozak later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and a whole lot more, including our latest Whisky Club of the Month winner. It's all ahead on this week's WhiskyCast.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. The forecast for the U.S. craft distilling industry is a stormy one, to say the least. A new survey of craft distillers released this week by the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States and the American Distilling Institute shows nearly 2 out of 3 could potentially go out of business within the next 6 months because of the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. As we've reported before, 9 out of 10 small-scale distillers make most of their revenue from sales in their on-site tasting rooms, and with bars still closed in most states by state-mandated lockdowns, that's meant they're surviving on what they can make from limited curbside sales and even more limited direct-to-consumer shipping options where that's legal. The survey found distillers have lost an average of 64% of their sales over the last 2 months, and nearly half of craft distillery workers have been laid off or furloughed. So far, the only economic stimulus relief directly affecting distillers is a federal excise tax break on the alcohol they make for use in hand sanitizers and deodorants. But that only counts when those products meet Food and Drug Administration standards. Discus CEO Chris Swanger is hoping the next round of economic stimulus legislation out of Congress includes more help specifically for distillers.
What's really sad about it is just over the last 10, 15 years, you've seen such a great growth in the craft distilling movement, 2,100 craft distillers. And, we're going to do our level best, work with Congress and the state governments to make sure that government does its role to help support these great businesses around the country so they can survive and then ultimately thrive. And there's a whole host of, public policy advocacy issues that we all have got to consider together. So now more than ever, the industry needs to come together.
What else can be done public policy-wise other than FET reform and making that permanent?
Well, certainly FET reform would help because it would help on a predictability perspective, but it won't help in the immediate, right? So, we're going to ask Congress to defer the FET payment that will expire in early July to even longer, because that will give some needed capital for craft distillers to use. Certainly, we're going to do our best to try to resolve some of the tariff problems that you and I have talked about many, many times before. It's a little bit challenging, I would have to say, as the U.S. and the EU are just focused on the COVID crisis itself. But we had a call today with our friends with Spirits Europe and the Scotch Whisky Association to kind of synchronize our efforts over the next couple of weeks, because we got to bring awareness with this administration and certainly in the EU as well, that these are dire times for our industry, and we're going to need some support. And the last thing we need is these tariffs that are imposing on distillers' ability to export. So, and all the while, as many states are looking to open up the economy, we've been pleasantly surprised by many of the state governors trying to find creative solutions to keep businesses open. We've seen, some states take up measures, albeit could be controversial measures like intrastate direct shipping, and that's important for many of these craft distillers, just to be able to get their product to their consumers, right? There's broader sensitive issues and working with our distributor and our retail partners, but extraordinary things have to be done during extraordinary times, and we want to make sure to do all we can to keep these great businesses afloat.
The Senate is scheduled to return to work on Capitol Hill this week, but the House will not return until next week at the earliest. There is no clear agreement on what a fourth round of economic relief would look like. Meanwhile, there's a positive report out of South Africa, where alcohol sales are still banned because of the pandemic. However, Distell's Andy Watts confirmed to us that the government has now removed its ban on production of wine and spirits for export. For the last few weeks, it's been illegal to even bottle whiskey at Distell's James Sedgwick Distillery for shipment overseas when the ban was lifted. Now might not seem like the time to invest in expansion projects, given all of the uncertainty about the future, but the partners in Utah's Ogden's own distillery are doing just that. While switching over their current plant to producing hand sanitizer, they also moved that entire facility to a larger building that CEO Steve Conlon expects to meet their needs for at least the next decade or so.
I don't know, they were just too dumb to be scared, but we were, we've been doing this for 10 years, and we've got a solid customer base, and unless the liquor stores all got closed down, we figured we'd still, have customers. And I think the statistics are pointing out that people are drinking more sitting at home than they were even going out to the bars. So I feel like our business is done fairly well through this, but it has changed the dynamic quite a bit.
With the need for social distancing shutting down entertainment options for a while, they're hoping to have the entire project completed by this fall. Meanwhile, Glen Murray Distillery in Scotland has received approval from Murray Council to turn a house next to the distillery in Elgin into a new visitors center and tasting room. The second floor of the house will be used for office space. Glen Murray is owned by France's LaMartiniquais and figures into a round-robin shuffling of U.S. importers announced this week. Glen Murray will be moving from Minnesota-based Prestige Beverage to Sazerac's 375 Park Avenue Spirits unit, where it will join LaMartiniquais' Cutty Sark blended Scotch brand. 375 Park Avenue had been handling the Inverhouse portfolio of Old Pulteney, Bowel Blair, Enoch, Hankey Bannister, and other brands, but is losing those brands after a new deal between Inverhouse and San Francisco-based Hodling & Company that takes effect June 1st. Meanwhile, the Glenallachie is changing importers as well, replacing Winebow with a new deal at Impex Beverages that took effect this week. That deal also includes the McNair's Lumreek blended Scotch from the Glenallachie, and impacts plans to expand the Glenallachie's distribution from its current 11 states to at least 20 additional states. Now, what does all of this mean for consumers? Well, in the U.S., it's the importer that's required to get label approvals from the federal government, not the brand's owner. And when a brand changes importers, the new one has to go through the label approval process all over again, since the label has to carry the new importer's name. Since the new importer can't actually get shipments into the U.S. until the new labels are approved and printed, that can lead to delays in restocking the whiskies at retailers. Now, that does not apply in the U.K., where Brown-Forman is controlling its own route to market for the first time since World War II. The family-controlled company has set up its own UK subsidiary to handle distribution for Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, and its other brands. The move ends an 18-year partnership between Brown-Forman and Bacardi in the UK market. And the Walsh Whisky Company is expanding the footprint for its Writer's Tears and the Irishman brands in Asia. Walsh has named import partners in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and Sri Lanka to go along with an existing relationship in Malaysia. One business note of interest to Irish whiskey and mixed martial arts fans: Beckley, which is the Beckman family's holding company that owns Jose Cuervo Tequila, Bushmills, Proximo Spirits, and other brands, released its first quarter earnings this week. Beckley separates its sales of tequilas from whiskey and other spirits brands, and the spirits category reported a 9.5% decline in global sales during the first 3 months of this year. No reason was given for the decline, but one of the brands in that portfolio was Conor McGregor's Proper No. 12 Irish Whiskey, which Beckley distributes through its network. The earnings report indicates Beckley raised its ownership percentage in McGregor's Ireborn Spirits Company from its original 20% stake to 49% ownership. The report did not disclose how much Beckley paid or whether it acquired those shares directly from McGregor or other investors. Now, I mention this because there's also a new Jose Cuervo tequila that has a link to Bushmills. Normally, I would not talk about new tequilas, but the new Jose Cuervo Tradicional Añejo is matured for at least a year in new American oak barrels, then finished for 4 months in barrels from Bushmills that were previously used for its single malts. It's on sale in the U.S. for about $33 a bottle. We do have new whiskeys to mention this week, including the latest release in the Balvenie's Stories collection. That collection made its debut last year with 3 single malts. The fourth is the new 19-year-old The Edge of Burnhead Wood. It's crafted with barley grown at the distillery and dried with smoke from heather collected from the Burnhead Wood in the hills around the Balvenie. It'll be available worldwide with a recommended retail price of £260, about $325 a bottle, though the U.S. pricing has not yet been announced. White & Mackay is releasing a new 44-year-old Jura single malt bottling into the Asian travel retail market. Only 21 bottles of the Jura Very Rare Vintage 1975 will be available. The whiskey spent its final 6 years in a tawny port pipe and will sell for around £6,900, about $8,600 a bottle. Glengoyne is giving whiskey lovers a way to kill some time during the coronavirus lockdown. The distillery has created a limited edition jigsaw puzzle featuring a painting of the distillery by John Lowry Morrison, also known as Jalomo. The 500-piece puzzle will sell for £10 with the purchase of any Glengoyne 70cl bottling on the distillery's website, with part of the proceeds going to the Drinks Trust and the Ben to help drinks industry workers. Unfortunately, the puzzle will not be available outside of the UK and Europe. Ireland's Chapelgate Whisky Company is out with its latest J.J. Corey release. The Hanson is a blended grain Irish whiskey using 4- and 10-year-old grain whiskies from 2 different Irish distilleries. The 4-year-old was matured in Chapelgate founder Louise McGuane's warehouse in County Clare in ex-bourbon barrels. It gets its name from the real J.J. Corey's son-in-law, who was an exciseman known as the Gauger Hansen more than 100 years ago. It's priced at around €50 a bottle on irishmalts.com. Heaven Hill is coming out with the second 2020 batches of its 2 barrel-proof whiskeys, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof and Larceny Barrel Strength. They're both designated as batches B520 each for the second batch of 2020 with a May release. The Elijah Craig comes in at 63.6% ABV, while the Larceny was bottled at 61.1%. I'll have tasting notes for both of them soon at the WhiskyCast website. And full disclosure, Heaven Hill is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. Michter's is releasing the 2020 edition of its 10-year-old bourbon this month. It's bottled at 47.2% ABV and will sell for around $130 a bottle. If you live in the U.S. Midwest, you may have seen the OKI brand whiskeys that came out of New Riff Distillery back in its early days while it was maturing its own whiskeys. OKI stood for Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, and it was the brand that New Riff put on the whiskeys it sourced from MGP in those days. That brand was retired a couple of years ago when New Riff's own whiskeys hit the market, but now it's being brought out of retirement. Cincinnati entrepreneurs Jake Warm and Chad Brizendine have bought the brand from New Riff and plan to relaunch it with single-barrel whiskeys this fall. Warm and Brizendine also helped found the George Remus whiskey brand a few years ago, before selling it to MGP in 2016. And finally, here's an update on our WhiskyCast In-Depth segment from the last episode. I spoke with Wiggle Whiskey co-founder Meredith Meyer-Grelly last week about the issues her distillery has been facing during the pandemic, especially the issues Wiggle had getting its application for Paycheck Protection Program funding processed. Its Pittsburgh-based bank never actually did submit that application to the federal government during the first round of PPP funding, but I heard from Meredith late this week that Wiggle's application has now been approved, and that's good news for the entire distillery team. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Heaven Hill's Parker Beam made a lot of great whiskeys during his lifetime, and the whiskey that carries his name is carrying on the tradition. The 13th edition of Parker's Heritage Collection just won Best Rye Whiskey honors and a double gold medal at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, and it continues Heaven Hill's commitment to the fight against ALS. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely. Drink wisely. I hope you'll join us for our next Whiskey Wednesday webcast this coming Wednesday. My guests will be White & Mackay's Richard Patterson, who is celebrating his 50th anniversary in the Scotch whiskey industry this year, along with Glenmorangie's Dr. Bill Lumsden. They'll take your questions live starting at 5 o'clock New York time this Wednesday afternoon on our YouTube channel, Periscope and Twitter, and on our Facebook page. And that's 2200 London time, 2100 GMT. Time now for the calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distillery. Let's start with the latest updates on postponements and cancellations. The Indie Spirits Expo, scheduled for June 8th in New York City, has been postponed until later this year. No new date has been set yet, while the Indie Spirits Expo scheduled for July in New Orleans as part of Tales of the Cocktail has been canceled. Whiskey and Barrel Night in New York City has been rescheduled once again, this time for July 16th. And the Bristol Whiskey and Spirits Festival in Bristol, England, has been moved to July 18th. Looking ahead to later this year, public health officials in New Brunswick are recommending that no large public events take place for the rest of this year, and that means the New Brunswick Spirits Festival this November has been canceled. This would have been the festival's 25th anniversary, The organizers have already confirmed their dates for November of 2021. Now for what is on the schedule. And remember, check with event organizers before you make any definite plans. Bonham's is planning to hold its next auction of rare whiskeys on May 16th in Hong Kong, along with an auction currently set for June 10th in Edinburgh, Scotland. The folks at Maltstock and the Whiskey Shop in Dufton are holding an online whiskey trivia competition Sunday, May 17th. There will be prizes in both individual and team competitions, along with a separate competition for whiskey industry professionals, with bragging rights only on the line. As of now, McTeers in Glasgow still has an auction of rare whiskeys set for May 22nd on its schedule. The Somerton Virtual Whiskey Festival will be online May 30th. And as we get more details on virtual Fagio plans from the distilleries on Islay, we'll add them to the calendar as well. The Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Festival is tentatively scheduled for June 6th in Wilmington, North Carolina, and June 13th in Richmond, Virginia. And the Whiskey Obsession Festival is still scheduled for June 25th in Tampa, Florida. We'll keep the calendar at WhiskyCast.com updated with the latest details on postponements, cancellations, and rescheduled events as we get word from event organizers. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits, including the Roundstone Rye and Rabble Rouser Bottled in Bond Rye. They do it all with renewable solar energy. In fact, you can actually see how their solar array is doing in real time at their website, CatoctinCreekDistilling.com.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock. The first time you visit a distillery, you might be a bit surprised when the tour guide tells you that they start out by making beer. Essentially, the milling and mashing processes are pretty similar for both whiskey and beer, along with a lot of the fermentation. Now, the beer brewers add hops along the way, while the whiskey brewers often use backset in their sour mash fermentations. And, of course, the distiller's beer that whiskey makers use then goes to the stills to be turned into the water of life. These days, there's enough surplus beer to fill a pretty good-sized lake, since the COVID-19 pandemic forced the closures of bars and restaurants in many parts of the U.S., which left craft brewers sitting on thousands of kegs of beer that have all been going bad. The other day, Brad Jaffe wrote a story for Bloomberg.com on WhistlePig Farm in Vermont, where they're helping brewers out by taking that skunky beer and distilling it. It's actually cheaper to haul the beer to the distillery than pay waste disposal charges to dump it. So, I got WhistlePig CEO Jeff Kozak and distillery manager Emily Harrison on the phone.
Tell me how the Great Beer Rescue came about.
Hey, Mark. It was. I think it was again just neighbors helping neighbors. So Emily and myself, we've always worked with Harpoon Brewery here. They have two brewery locations, one in Vermont and one in Massachusetts, right in Boston and in the harbor. And we've done some barrel aging projects with them. They had aged a Baltic Porter in our barrels recently, and when the COVID started to happen, obviously a lot of brewers ended up having their kegs kind of getting stuck in the supply chain, and also, their fresh beer kind of going stale dated. So I think Emily was talking to them about, again, just a barrel aging project, and they asked if we could start, or pick up their existing beer that was in their in their coolers right now. We didn't even start talking about kegs at that point. That's really where it started from.
Emily, how did this progress from just picking up the excess beer in their coolers to taking full kegs of skunky beer?
Well, I think it's just that they had so much beer that we started loading up tankers of it instead of just like totes or one-offs. And then word's kind of spread now that, we're doing this. So expanded to full-on stainless steel tankers instead of just totes or conversations about like, hey, can you distill this?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing how quickly other brewers kind of latched on to the idea, and then again, it started out as just trying to be helpful, and then we kind of realized that maybe this was going to make some interesting whiskey. And so, we started actually talking to other brewers, as far as Texas. So there's a brewer there that we've always been friendly and did other barrel aging projects with called St. Arnold's. And they're like, hey, can you take some of our beer too? So, every week I think I tell Emily, hey, there's somebody new in the mix and, can we figure out the space or do we have the capacity to do it? So it's definitely started to kind of move more from just, local friends and neighbors helping each other to more of like a cool project, which might have some great spirit results at the end of it.
Emily, how is this working for you in terms of intermingling all this beer with your regular production, or is it replacing your regular mashing and fermenting for now?
Right now, it's been replacing our regular mashing and fermenting. I'm actually filling up fermenters with this instead of with mash, so it's a little bit easier to just unload a tanker into fermenters instead of actually making the mash myself. But yeah, it's been replacing it. It's been an interesting time just because we're a craft distiller. We do everything by hand in terms of heads and hearts cuts. So it's been fun every beer truck trying to figure out what the heads taste like and what the hearts taste like, because it doesn't taste like whiskey. It still has the characteristics of beer. So figuring that out has been fun, and our distillers have been enjoying it.
Now, how do you get the CO2 out? Because obviously that can cause some problems in the still if it gets in there.
Yeah, so we have open top fermenters. So it's just flat beer. It's like, letting your glass of beer sit out for days. Open top fermentation kind of takes care of it, where it's open to the air, it flattens out. We did have one incident where it was an issue with foaming. So we didn't realize that it was going to foam up in the still, and it started climbing up the towers, and we just saw a bunch of foam. So I just opened the lid of the still that day, let all the foam out, and went home because I was covered in beer. But, we haven't really had any CO2 issues per se.
So what's the spirit taste like compared to your normal rye spirit when it comes off the still?
Honestly, it tastes like beer. I don't know how else to describe it. It maintains those core beer characteristics. Tastes like the roasted grains, the hops, all of it's still in there. It's just in a distillate form now.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting how the barrel aging ends up, right? So we've been obviously trying different barrel types too, different chars and different toasts. Because again, it's probably best to try and experiment right now because there's no real playbook for this. So when we talk to our friends at Independent Stave, other than people that have used beer, basically to replicate a single malt, right? It's the types of malted barley that these brewers are using or their hops are using obviously do not lend itself to making more of a distiller's beer. So I think you got the distillation side, which Emily is kind of managing, and then we're trying to figure out what's the right and proper maturation technique that's going to make this into something that's palatable down the road.
Yeah.
But when you're experimenting, the idea is to take an experiment to its conclusion, see whether it works or not, and then try something else. In this case, you're doing all these experiments at the same time, and hopefully something's going to actually be usable down the road in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think it all starts with good distillate. So that's why I've been, harping in my distillers' heads that, they need to actually really focus on it. It's not going to taste the same as rye. So make sure that they get the best distillate out that they can out of it. And then Independent Stave knows what they're doing in terms of experimenting with barrels. We just got to figure out what's complementary. I mean, experimenting with whiskey takes a lot of time. So we're just kind of going for it.
Are you keeping the beer from each brewery separate so that you could bottle it as a separate whiskey, or are you going to just blend these all together and go for it?
It depends on what we're trying to IP it through the process, right? So one tanker of beer ends up being about 10 barrels of whiskey that's being aged. So the ask of the brewer is to try and keep, we'll even take short tankers if we can keep the IP of the beer separate so that they're not just dumping every keg that they have. So the goal would be to keep, as much, lineage of that original beer, because I think it'll add to the, marketing and the collaboration at a later date. And the brewers are involved in that too, where we're helping them and want to make sure that they also get, involved in the process when essentially becomes, mature and able for sale.
Have you figured out yet which type of beer is producing, and it's hard to say right now, obviously, but which one is producing the best new make spirit at least?
I don't know that I'd say I haven't had anything that tastes bad. It's more that things just taste different. I'm used to tasting rye or bourbon off the still. So a lot of these flavors are different, especially when it comes to hops. But, they're adding really cool flavors like fruitier notes that we're not used to. We're used to cutting those out in heads cuts, but they're coming out in hearts cuts. I haven't had anything that's best or worse or anything like that. It's also different, just like beer.
Yeah, Vermont is the king of IPAs for sure, right? And then obviously there's all these the double IPAs and the triple IPAs, and again, my opinion is I think some more of the pale ales and unhopped ones will probably make better whiskeys, but then again, who knows, right? The flavor profile, I guess, is still to be determined.
Yeah, we did one maple porter before all this started that was fantastic from Lawson's, but I'm getting a tanker of an IPA today that I'm also just as equally as excited about.
I have to admit, this is a really cool project, and obviously it's made it a little easier for you guys in terms of not having to worry as much about sourcing grain right now if you're not making your own mashes.
Yeah, we generally grow our own grain, or as much as we possibly can. So, that's basically meant that we haven't been pulling as much from our own silos on the farm. Again, I don't know how long this is going to last. If it's, 2 months, 3 months, right? I think it'll ultimately come down to, how quickly the distributors and move, right? So again, I think we're just trying to make, lemonade out of lemons, right? And then, resume back distilling when this surplus beer kind of ends. But till then, I think I told Emily, I said, hey, I think we should try it as long as it's available and learn from it, again, and have some fun with it.
And you should be planting your own rye about now, I would assume, right? Or is it already out in the field?
It's already out in the field. We should be harvesting soon.
Oh, that's right, because you're growing it during the winter.
Yeah, we're looking at, again, a June probably, right? It's generally emerged and it looks really healthy this year, right? We've had a relatively wet spring, so I think our yields will be decent this year. Yeah, I would say June-ish, right? We're a little earlier here than typical, but, mid-June, I'd say we'd be harvesting.
The thing that I'm thinking when I'm talking with you guys, and tell me if you agree with this or not, I think Dave Pickerel would be all over this and just having a ball with this, because that sounds like something that he would have just jumped right into with both feet.
Yeah, Dave would have loved it. Yeah, for sure. He was always about exploration, right? So, again, after his time with makers and then getting into the craft business, this is just exactly up his alley. So again, probably maybe there's a tie to him at a later date, right, with this project. But definitely, I think his zest for exploration has definitely inspired Emily and the team here.
Yeah.
Emily, how much did you get to work with Dave?
I unfortunately did not get to work with him, but everything he did here clearly carries through in the spirit of everyone that I've worked with here, and it's unfortunate that I didn't get to work with him, because I would have loved it.
Oh yeah, because he was a hell of a guy, larger than life in so many ways.
Yeah. definitely drew me towards looking at working at this company.
While most distillers work with unhopped beer, it's not completely out of character for some to use fully brewed beer. For instance, Marko Karakasevich at Charbet Distillery in Northern California has been doing just that for years. He collaborates with nearby Bear Republic Brewing to turn its Racer 5 IPA beer into the R5 whiskey. You'll find my tasting notes for that one at whiskycast.com. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with a bottle that's been sitting on my tasting table for a while now, WhistlePig's Farm Stock Rye Crop Number 3. This one is made from 52% of WhistlePig's own 3-year-old rye distilled on the farm in Vermont, along with 48% 6 and 10-year-old rye whiskey from Alberta Distillers in Calgary. It's bottled at 43% ABV, and the nose is sweet with a hint of maple, soft baking spices, honey, vanilla, and caramel. The taste is spicy with a touch of red apples, complementing clove, allspice, and a hint of cinnamon, along with hints of honey and a citrusy tartness in the background. The finish is long with gentle spices and touches of apples and honey. In this case, the older whiskeys take some of the edge off the younger rye, and I'm scoring WhistlePig's Farm Stock Rye Crop Number 3 an 89. India's Amrut distillery is known for its single malts, but a single grain? Okay, here's the story. This single-grain whiskey was distilled at a different distillery, then matured at Amrut in ex-bourbon barrels, and bottled as a single cask at 57.1% ABV. The nose has notes of honey, buttered popcorn, sawdust, and hints of vanilla, allspice, and butterscotch. The taste has spicy notes of black pepper and allspice that are balanced out nicely by honey, vanilla, butterscotch, and a hint of citrus. The finish is long with subtle spices and a mouth-watering hint of tropical fruits. I'm scoring the Amrut single-grain bottling number 1 a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey and its new Brewers Select Rye Ale Barrel finish. It's a collaboration between Sagamore Spirit in Maryland and Sierra Nevada in California, where they filled up Sagamore Spirit barrels with their red ale beer for a while, then shipped the barrels back to Maryland to give Sagamore Spirit Rye a unique touch. Look for it now at select retailers and get the whole story at sagamorespirit.com. Bruichladdich Beer Barley 2010 was made from the heritage style of beer, and that's BERE barley, grown on the Orkney Islands. The vintage is the crop year of 2010, while it was distilled on Islay a year later. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is malty and sweet with a fruity touch of peaches, along with toffee, chocolate fudge, and a hint of coconut cream pie. The taste is thick and oily with a good balance of oak, peaches, barley sugar, honey, and chocolate. The finish has lingering fruity notes of peaches and apples, along with hints of oak, barley sugar, and a touch of chocolate. There's excellent character and complexity here. I'm scoring the Bruichladdich 2010 Beer Barley Single Malt a 93. While I was in New Zealand back in March for Dramfest in Christchurch, I picked up a bottle of Adelphi's Tianinic 12-year-old single malt at the Whiskey Galore shop. It's probably one of the darkest whiskeys I've ever seen. It's bottled at 52.9% ABV, and the nose has notes of toffee, dark fruits, licorice, and a bit of anise. The taste is full of plums, raisins, and red grapes, balanced by clove, white pepper, and hints of anise and brown sugar. The finish is long, dark, and fruity. I'm scoring the Adelphi Tianinic 12-year-old 2019 release 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
It's time to announce our latest Whisky Club of the Month. Each month we pick a whiskey club somewhere in the world to honor as our Club of the Month. Now, normally we would not pick a collegiate whiskey club, since it's hard to make sure that all of the members are of legal drinking age. However, when the college is Scotland's Heriot-Watt University, that's different. Of course, Heriot-Watt has what's arguably one of the finest brewing and distilling graduate programs anywhere in the world, and it's perfectly logical that there would be a whiskey club on the campus. It's called the Heriot-Watt University Whiskey Society, and here's what Alistair McDermott told us about the club in his nomination email. The Heriot-Watt University Whiskey Society is a group of whiskey enthusiasts from around the world. Most of us consist of brewing and distilling students who are passionate about whiskey. We have whiskey tastings of varying themes, such as Irish, American, regions of Scotland, cask types, malternatives, and a luxury tasting, which we do at the end of every semester. This year, unfortunately, we had to perform a virtual whiskey tasting on Zoom, considering the current circumstances. It is the end of the year, so the current committee members are passing the torch to the next round of leaders to keep this great whiskey club going for years to come. Alistair, thanks for the email, and to those members who are completing their degree work this month, congratulations. We'll be sending the club 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at their tastings when classes resume in the fall. Now, if you're in a whiskey club and want to be considered for next month's Whiskey Club of the Month honors, all you have to do is use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us and tell us about your club. If you have a website or a social media presence, we'll be glad to add a link on our Whiskey Clubs page at our website so potential members can find you. Once again, congratulations to the Heriot-Watt University Whiskey Society, our Whiskey Club of the Month for May. And thanks to Glencairn Crystal for helping us support whiskey clubs around the world. Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. Our story on the Discus ADI Craft Distilling Survey at WhiskyCast.com this week brought this comment from Jim Officius on Twitter. What a magnificent pair of stills in your photo. I wish. This depression is going to be terrible for many. Those that survive should have plenty of room to grow when this is over. Well, that photo was of the stills at Republic Restoratives Distillery in Washington, which was one of the distilleries that took part in the survey. We did reach out to them by email for the story, but never heard back from them. I tweeted out the news about the New Brunswick Spirits Festival's cancellation as soon as I confirmed it on Tuesday, and that brought this response from @TrennyandC. Wow, they're canceling events in November already? Really hope Victoria Whiskey Fest is still safe in January. You and me both. As of now, the guidance in many places is to avoid holding large public gatherings through at least the end of this year. And as of now, there's nothing to report on the status from Victoria yet. Ryan Madden asked this on Twitter this week about our live webcasts. Anywhere to catch the replay? Of course, we know that not everyone can join us for the live streams, so the replays are always available on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page, and for at least a while on Twitter and Periscope, too. We are also in the process of setting up a webcast archive page at the WhiskyCast website. One of the other things you'll find at the website now is our whiskey photo of the week, or in this case, the Whiskey Zoom background of the week. I've started pulling photos from my image archive to post on the website as downloadable backgrounds that you can import into Zoom or most other video conferencing software for your virtual meetings. This week's photo features a bunch of hogshead casks in a warehouse at Glenmurray Distillery in Scotland. And after I posted it, former Glenmurray manager Graham Cool tweeted this: "I'm afraid to admit I recognized the casks before reading the text." Well, Graham is now the distillery manager at Dingle in Ireland, and he mentioned something on Twitter about producing some peated whiskey there. That ought to be interesting. Hey, one other final note. If you've watched our webcasts the last week or so, I've been talking about Buzz for Bartenders, and that's hashtag Buzz, 4, and bartenders. If you've seen the webcasts, you can tell that by now my hair is starting to look just a bit shaggy. In fact, I'm starting to look a bit like our sheepdog Bristow. So we've started Buzz for Bartenders, once again, hashtag Buzz, 4, and bartenders, to raise money for the United States Bartenders Guild Foundation and its Bartenders Emergency Assistance Program that's helping bartenders and other bar workers who have been put out of work by the coronavirus pandemic and the shutdown of bars around the country. Now, here's the deal. We've posted links on the website, and if you make a donation to either the USBG Foundation, the Drinks Trust in the UK, or the Ben, or any other similar charity that's working with bar workers in your country if you live outside the U.S., send me the receipts at comments@whiskycast.com or post a copy on social media with your address and, of course, your credit card number blanked out. Our goal is by this Wednesday night at midnight New York time or so to raise at least $1,500 for these charities around the world. If we make it, on our Friday webcast on the Happy Hour show at the end of the webcast, Christina is going to take the dog clippers that she normally uses on Bristow, put the 1.5-inch guard on the thing, and give me a COVID cut. If we're lucky enough to raise $2,500, she's going to leave the guard off and give me a military spec buzz cut. We'll do it all on streaming video Friday night on the Happy Hour webcast if we reach our goal. You'll find a link for more details, of course, at the WhiskyCast website. And if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, once again, comments@whiskycast.com. Your voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all those other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Got this question on Twitter the other day from Scott Rogers in Wisconsin. Does anyone in Scotland make a whiskey that might qualify as single blend, as in grain and malt spirit from a single distillery? Many American whiskeys would qualify, but does any blended whiskey in Scotland meet that standard? Well, it's an interesting question given the very strict rules governing Scotch whiskey. For instance, single malts can only be distilled in a pot still, period. Anything distilled in a column still must automatically be labeled as a grain whiskey, even if it's made with 100% malted barley. But you might actually be able to find older bottlings labeled as single blends, and if you know what to look for, there are still a few so-called single blends being made today. Loch Lomond Distillery is one of the handful of distilleries in Scotland that has both pot and column stills. Loch Lomond Master Blender Michael Henry joined us on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast this week, and after the live webcast ended, I asked him to explain.
The single blend used to be a category up to 2009, and when the new version of the Scotch whisky regulations were released, that category was dropped. But what they did do is they put a regulation in that if you put the name of a distillery on the bottle, 100% of that liquid has to be from that distillery. So by default, if it's a blend, then both the malt component and the grain component has to be from that distillery. So although the category doesn't exist anymore, you still know that you have a single distillery blend.
There are maybe 3 or 4 distilleries in Scotland that can do this.
Yeah, say there's ourselves, Grant's, Girvan with the grain side, and their Elsa Bay malt distillery. But also there's a growing number of smaller distilleries who are putting different grain mashes through pot stills. You have Knive that have launched a single malt, single grain, and a blend that's carrying the name of the distillery. I think Ardbeke and Inchdarney are also doing single grains through pot stills.
So what would you call it then? You can't call it a single blend, so you just have to call it a blended Scotch, right?
Yeah, so it's under the category blended Scotch. But if you see a distillery name on a blended Scotch, then you know that the malt and grain are from that one distillery.
Now, you guys ran into a bit of a kerfuffle with the SWA a few years ago because you wanted to produce a single malt in the column still at Loch Lomond, and they said, no, you can't do that, right?
No, it had been used at several distilleries in Scotland over the last kind of 100-odd years. I know Yoker Distillery was one in Glasgow, late 1800s. There had been a traditional kind of precedent where malted barley wash was put through a column still. It was termed silent malt. It had fallen out of use. We approached it as a way of sort of low energy malt production for blending. I think our column stills that run a malt use about 10% of the energy of a pot still. We didn't really have an intention to bottle it as a single malt. It was more to provide another style of liquid for blending, but it kind of, I think it panicked the SWA at the time, and we weren't members. So to be honest about it, we kind of took it to court to make a point about just us not being members and kind of not giving a say about the regulations that would be affecting us. So under the new ownership, we're now part of the SWA. We're still kind of in discussions with them if there's kind of any way we can, any kind of compromise that we could come to on this. But I think for the moment, it's anything we produce from that still, even though it's 100% malted barley, it's classed as single grain.
As I've mentioned in a previous Behind the Labels segment, while the Scotch Whisky Association is a private trade association representing its members, the Scotch Whisky Act of 2009 does give it specific authority to go after violations of the law in the UK courts against both members and non-members. Thanks to Michael Henry of Loch Lomond Distillers for helping us answer Scott's question. And if you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for our webcasts, the WhiskyCast HD videos, and our WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast. You'll also find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. We love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.